Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to learn about the activity life cycle. Now if you notice that we have studied about activities in a little bit of detail in the previous lectures, like what an activity is and what an activity does, but whenever you actually want to build real life Android applications, then it's important to understand the activity life cycle. And activity life cycle is basically nothing but what are the different phases through which your activity goes through while it's actually live on your mobile's screen. So without wasting any time, let's directly jump into the lecture and understand the activity life cycle. So let's first look at the activity stack. So what happens is that your mobile device actually has an activity stack, and that activity stack is going to hold up certain activity. And let's say you launch the YouTube application on your device. So now what happens is that now you have the YouTube activity running in your activity stack. Now what happens if you get a notification from Facebook, like you have a friend request, or let's say you have a new message. So in that case, what will happen is that as soon as you click on the Facebook's notification, it's actually going to take you to the Facebook app, and now on this stack, the Facebook activity will be loaded on top of the YouTube activity. So now the stack has two activities, that is the Facebook activity and the YouTube activity. Now what happens is that initially when we only have the YouTube activity, it was in the running state, but as soon as the Facebook activity comes into picture, the Facebook activity now becomes the running activity, whereas the YouTube activity becomes a paused activity. So as you could see here, we are able to see the two states of an activity, that is the running state and the pause state, and these different states in which the activity are is nothing but the life cycles of those particular activities. So any general activity in Android has basically multiple states in which they could be present, and what Android actually does is that Android actually provides us with a set of callback methods which we could use to determine what happens when you're into that particular activity. The next important thing which comes to mind is why to basically go ahead and study the different activity states. So what usually happens is that let's say you are building some application, like let's say you are building a Uber application. So what happens is that when you open up the app, the activity is currently running, and let's say you suddenly get a call from one of your friends. So what happens is that the Uber application's activity actually gets destroyed. And what I mean by destroyed is that whatever details you're having on your app or whatever data you are having on your app actually gets destroyed by a new activity. That is, now you no longer have the location, now you no longer have your login credentials, and you no longer have any data in your app. So when your friend disconnects your call, you could see that the Uber application restarts and you will no longer have access to the data which you previously had. So in such cases, what we want to do is that we basically want to tell your Android application that whenever we basically resume a particular activity, instead of destroying it, what we need to do is that we actually need to go ahead and save the certain data into somewhere before basically quitting the activity. One more example to understand this concept is, let's say you want to build an MP3 player. So if you notice, the MP3 application has a feature so that when you play a particular song and when you exit out of this application, the song is still going to be played into the background. So you could basically go ahead and open up any other activity, but still the music is going to be played in the background. And that is only possible when you basically study the different activity states which are present in an activity life cycle. So this is the importance and significance of learning the activity life cycle. So what we will do is that we will have a brief overview of the activity life cycle of an activity. So as you could see, this is the basic diagram of the activity life cycle, and at the top you could see that activity is launched. The activity first goes into the state which is the onCreate state. So in the onCreate state, what happens is that the onCreate callback method gets called. So basically when you create the activity, the onCreate is called, and in that onCreate, whatever code is written inside the onCreate method is going to be called. Now the onCreate method usually has the code which is basically used to set up your UI. So in the previous lecture, we already went through the code, and you could notice that in the onCreate, there is a line of code which basically sets up the layout to the XML layout which we have. So you could use the onCreate callback to basically set up the layout. Then we have the onStart, and this is where your activity actually starts. So what you could do with onStart is that you could have all the variables and everything like that initialized in the onStart state. And after the onStart state, we have the onResume state. Now onResume state is the state when the activity actually comes to the foreground. So these are the three states through which the activity goes through when the activity is first launched. So first one is the onCreate, then there is onStart, and then there is actually the onResume state. Now what happens if a certain new activity comes into picture? So for example, let's say your application is up and running on the device, and certainly you get a notification from some other activity, or let's say your friend actually calls on your device. So now the activity running state actually gets paused, and now the state becomes the on pause, and now the activity turns to the pause state. Now in the pause state, the activity is not destroyed, that is, all the details in that particular activity are intact. And now what happens is that, if you could notice on the left hand side, the apps with higher priority which need memory, so let's say the next app which you open up needs higher memory, so that application is given the priority and the app process is killed. Now on the right hand side, as you could see, when the user returns to the activity, so for example, let's say you are running your application, your friend actually gave you a call, you completed the call, and after completing the call, you again go back to the main application. So in that case, again onResume is called. So basically in onResume, you could specify the code which you want to execute when the user actually resumes using your application. So that is basically what is going to be present in the onResume. And after onPause, as you could see, there is an onStop state as well. Now once the activity is stopped, it again needs to be started. So for that, we also have the onRestart state, which basically restarts your application. And at the end, it's the onDestroy, which basically completely destroys the activity. That is, it basically flushes out your application from the memory, so that your application is no longer using the valuable resources which can now be used by some other applications. So this is one of the most important things which you are going to learn in this course, that is basically the activity lifecycle. And the reason why activity lifecycle is so important is because these are the concepts, or the high level concepts, which we will be using when we build actual apps and you want to optimize your apps for a better performance. So from these states or these callback methods, you could basically design your app in such a way that your app is more resource efficient. That is, it should not be holding resources for a longer period of time, because if it actually does, then nobody is going to use your app, because your app consumes more RAM or more resources. So this is actually used for optimization purposes as well. When you want to optimize your applications, the activity lifecycle comes into handy, and these callback methods comes handy. You could use them, and you could basically go ahead and play with them to optimize your app. So this was actually a very brief and short intro about activity lifecycle, because I didn't want to confuse you guys at this stage at least. So we are actually going to use these activity lifecycle methods or the callbacks in the upcoming lectures, wherein we will be learning the actual application. So in the next lecture, what we will do is that we will have a small demonstration of how these callback methods actually work. So in the upcoming lecture, we will design a small application which is basically going to show us when is the particular activity present in each one of these states. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.